So welcome audience to our project presentation. I have to say that I'm super excited. This week we have two back-to-back, well not back-to-back, but two projects being presented by two folks that came into the Wildland Studies program with CARX's, California Burn Boss qualifications. And I am super excited to have worked with both of them in their work. And also the fact that Devyn, who's presenting today on his work at Pepperwood Preserve, is a fellow slug from UC Santa Cruz. And when I found that out, two things was like, Devyn's got to be an all right guy, because one, I started out at Santa Cruz, and two, I'm a CARX. So like, what an awesome situation to be able to work with some great people in this kind of stuff. And so, you know, the typical format that we use for a Wildland Studies presentation, and sometimes they're called defenses. I want to say, I'm going to call it a presentation because in my opinion, in my preparation for going through this in my own grad school, is that we don't send a student forward unless they are ready to present their information and their research is solid. So there's nothing to defend. And that's what I want to say, because we've got students here who are going through this themselves. So don't feel like you have to defend anything. It's a presentation of your work, and you've earned it at this point. I'm going to turn it over to Devyn to share his work. The format is that Devyn will present. We will have the committee, which includes Brian and myself, asking the initial questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. We have a hard stop at 11, probably at about 10:45-ish. We may have some students filtering in because this is a classroom I'll be teaching in. But I'm going to turn it over to Devyn, yeah, take the show, Devyn.
All right, thank you, Don. Let's see this. Awesome. So my name is Devyn Friedfel, and I am going to be presenting to you today my master's project, which is a fire stewardship plan for Pepperwood. Just a brief little overview on what I'll be presenting on, just the introduction to the statement of the problem, introduction to Pepperwood, the project intent, the project design, which includes Appendix A, which is a burn program overview, and then an Appendix B, which is the programmatic burn plan. And I will be taking questions and giving some answers after. So since time immemorial, Pepperwood was stewarded by the Wapo people. Fire was one of the main ways they tended to the land. However, since European colonization, intentional fire and wildfires have been suppressed, leading to adverse effects on ecosystems and community health. Without regular occurrence of low-intensity fire, our fire-dependent landscapes become susceptible to Doug fir encroachment, like you can see here, and other woody species. We also lose critical habitat and decrease resilience to disturbances such as drought, disease outbreaks, and future wildfires. Without the process of fire, California's fire-dependent ecosystems become unbalanced and overloaded with fuels, leading to future catastrophic wildfires. We have seen the impacts in the North Bay, particularly in Sonoma, Napa, and Lake counties. This map shows the footprints of the wildfires that burnt through these counties in just 2015 to 2020. You can see it takes up a good portion of the area. These wildfires have polluted waterways, destroyed over 5,000 homes, impacted culturally significant sites and species, type-converted habitats, closed businesses and schools, killed pets and wildlife, and they've even taken human lives. Because of the intensity of some of these fires, many of the landscapes have been altered for the foreseeable future. The reintroduction of intentional fire to California's ecosystems is essential in maintaining the ecosystem health, diversity, and honoring and preserving cultural heritage and traditional ecological knowledge, while also helping communities transition to become more fire adapted. helping us to live in tandem with California's fire-prone landscape. And Pepperwood sits kind of right in the middle there, where the 2019 Kincaid and 2017 Tubbs fire overlap. And there's another map that shows kind of more specifically where Pepperwood sits between those two fire scars. So Pepperwood is not a stranger to the repercussions of fire suppression and the suppression of ecocultural stewardship. Pepperwood has burnt in these two recent wildfires, and the red represents the Kincaid fire, the yellow is the Tubbs fire, and that orange area is actually where those fires overlapped. Although some of the areas did burn with high intensity, these fires also helped reset the clock on the fire process. The wildfires also made it clear to Pepperwood stewardship staff that bringing back fire on the preserves needs to be the highest priority. So Pepperwood is a 501c3 organization dedicated to advancing science-based conservation through active land stewardship, research, education, and community building. Pepperwood Preserve consists of 3,200 acres located in the northeast of Santa Rosa in the southern Mayacamas Mountains. The 3,200 acre preserve is a living laboratory where active land stewardship, research, monitoring, and education can come together to support healthy and resilient landscapes. The preserve is a perfect place for me to implement my master's project, the Fire Stewardship Plan. Pepperwood has experienced 2 wildfires, and they've watched the land recover. The board and the staff are supportive of intentional fire. They have a Native Advisory Council to advise and participate in stewardship. They work closely with CAL FIRE and local fire districts to reduce fuels in strategic areas. By many, they are viewed as a local community leader in land stewardship. They have active ecological and abiotic monitoring, and they've already started the process of bringing back intentional fire. The intention of my project is to provide a long-term fire stewardship plan to help ease some of the challenges for implementing prescribed and cultural fires at Pepperwood. Funding, regulations, and social acceptance all create challenges to implement fire at an effective scale. The Fire Stewardship Plan will ease some of these challenges by documenting a step-by-step planning process that can be used by current and future Pepperwood staff, and provide a framework for others in the community. Additionally, the project includes a programmatic burn plan that will help streamline the permitting environmental compliance process while supporting future funding applications and helping inform partners of future burn plans and those estimated timelines. In the end, this project intends to reintroduce culturally and ecologically appropriate fire return intervals, supporting the goals of Pepperwood's Native Advisory Council, research team, and outside partners. So this project is kind of broken down into 2 parts. Appendix A is a burn program overview, and Appendix B is the programmatic burn plan. And together they make up the Fire Stewardship Plan. So Appendix A of this project is a step-by-step process of how Pepperwood implements fire stewardship. This portion of the Fire Stewardship Plan provides background and context on why and how Pepperwood conducts intentional burns. It begins with an introduction to the Pepperwood organization and its land base. This is preceded by a broad overview of the Wapo people and how fire was important to their connection to the land. I felt this section was really important to place at the beginning in order to give invaluable context to the rest of the stewardship plan. Pepperwood's Native Advisory Chair, Clint McKay, provided important context and guidance when writing this section. This leads into the description of the fire return intervals across Pepperwood's vegetation communities. I start this section off with the WAPO perspective of reading the landscape for fire. This perspective was informed by both Pepperwood's Native Advisory Council and supported by literature from Dr. Hankins. I next describe the fire return intervals in a Western perspective by describing the literature that defines the duration between fires. These studies talk about fire return intervals in specific vegetation communities across the state, painting just a very broad brushstroke. However, I do specifically emphasize one study that looks at the fire return intervals in oak woodlands at Annandale State Park, located just a few kilometers south of Pepperwood, but still in the Yakima Mountains, which gives this very important localized context. After the historic fire return intervals, the burn program overview discusses recent or post-colonial wildfires. Records of wildfires at Pepperwood start around in the 1870s. And I do mention each of these fires, but I put most of the emphasis on the 2017 Tubbs fire and the 2019 Kincaid fire, which is shown in this map. I do this because these two fires are the most relevant to Pepperwood's current burn program. So the Tubbs fire burnt approximately 95% of the preserve, and that fire was driven by extreme weather conditions and exacerbated by a historically high fuel load, which is a consequence of prolonged fire suppression and insufficient forest stewardship. Just 2 years later, in 2019, the Kincaid fire burnt about 60% of the preserve. Now, 100% of the preserve has been burnt between these two wildfires, and about half the preserve has been burnt twice in close succession. During the Kincaid fire, CAL FIRE utilized Pepperwood to establish containment lines, successfully preventing the fire from spreading to the Mark West community, which was still recovering and rebuilding from the 2017 fire. However, these suppression efforts resulted in 15 miles of bulldozer lines, making the repercussions of fire suppression efforts unignorable. In this section, I also do mention some of the positive impacts of the unplanned ignitions, especially in areas that burnt in low to moderate severities. They were able to bring fire back in some of the areas on the preserve that would be extremely challenging to bring back intentional fire. So resetting the fire clock, to say, across the preserve. The burn program overview also mentions some of the other stewardship activities that Pepperwood engaged in, such as invasive plant management, native plant propagation, planting, rotational grazing, mechanical fuels reduction, and others. It doesn't go into too much detail about this, but I just felt like it was important context when thinking about burn planning. The bulk of the burn plan overview is Pepperwood's current burn planning process. It starts off by giving the context that there is huge variation in burn planning based on size, complexity, goals, vegetation type, seasonality, and others. Also, the planning process should consider both ecological, cultural, and fuels objectives. The planning process consists of 12 components: identifying burn units, designating a burn lead, setting goals, preparing the unit, developing burn plans, acquiring permits, implementing monitoring strategies, organizing resources, issuing notifications, drafting an incident action plan, conducting a leader intent briefing, and executing the burn. Each of these components describes Pepperwood's current approach to these processes. The complexity of each step really depends on the specific burn parameters. There's also a post-burn section of the burn program overview that describes the documentation process, both for reflection for future burns, but also for storytelling and sharing that information with our community. Appendix B of the program is a programmatic burn plan for oak woodlands and grasslands at Pepperwood. This section streamlines the process of selecting, planning, and permitting intentional burns at Pepperwood. Given Pepperwood's large size and extensive need for fire across the property, prioritizing units can be time-consuming and require on-the-ground inspections. Developing Burn plans for individual burn units can be labor intensive and add complexities to the overall implementation of intentional burns. The programmatic burn plan reduces the burden of both these tasks, increasing the capacity to conduct more burns and informing partners about Pepperwood's upcoming burn schedule. The burn plan contains 10 different burn units, 5 of grasslands and 5 of oak woodlands. The structure of this plan similarly follows the California Standardized Burn Plan. I chose to make the burn plan similar to this format because this is the preferred format by CAL FIRE. By making the format similar, it will allow this burn plan to be submitted for CAL FIRE permits and to the State Claims Fund. This plan is also designed so that additional burn units and vegetation communities can be added to it over time. The plan is broken down into 8 sections: a project area description, vegetation community description, individual burn unit descriptions, smoke management, operational considerations, notifications, risk management, and fire behavior modeling. Oak woodlands and grasslands are the vegetation communities that I selected because they are the most predominant communities at the preserve, roughly accounting for 2,000 acres. They also hold high ecological and cultural significance. Because of the nature of the interconnectivity of Pepperwood's ecosystems, many units contain multiple vegetation types. However, all of the units in this burn plan contain majority grassland or majority oak woodlands. The vegetation communities description includes a map of the vegetation communities, which is this map you see here, a map showing all the burn units, a description of the vegetation communities, the goals, and the prescription for each targeted vegetation community. The 10 burn units in this plan account for 578 acres. You can see the burn units defined in this map. Each burn unit in the plan includes a map of the burn unit, specific unit objectives, photos, acreage, slope, aspect, fuel description, recommendations for prep work, how to access and move around the preserve, what is the water supply, the seasonality of the burn, and patrol considerations. All really following similar to the California Standardized Burn Plan. Smoke management section includes an air quality districts that Pepperwood consists of, which is actually 2 different air quality districts, the permits that are required, the smoke management techniques, and wind considerations. Operational considerations include pre-burn weather and fuel observations, on-site observations, ignition plans, holding plans, minimum resources required, the fire effects monitoring, and post-burn activities. The notification section include Pepperwood's pre-burn notifications and day of burn notifications specific to Pepperwood. The risk management section includes a contingency plan, a wildfire conversion plan, action points, escape routes and safety zones, a medical plan, a briefing checklist, and a go, no-go checklist. And last, the fire behavior modeling was done for both grasslands and oak woodland fuel descriptions. 1 unit from each vegetation community was selected to model. To model, I used Behave Plus version 6, and printouts of the containment runs were attached to this section of the programmatic burn plan. Thank you all for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
All right, so typically our process is to begin with Brian and I as the committee for Devyn to ask questions. Brian Peterson with Audubon Canyon Ranch is Devyn's second reader on this project, and we'll start with Brian asking initial questions if he has any.
Yeah, thanks, Don. First off, good job, Devyn. I think the most important question I have is, when are we going to reburn that unit with the cream cups in it? I think was in your second or third slide. You don't have to answer that now, but I hope we're invited when you do. Yeah.
I will. I want to say maybe this coming fall or fall.
Yeah.
26.
We won't hold you to it, but yeah.
It's a high priority, both from our Native Advisory Council. That view is also outside of my office window. So it's high on my priority list too.
Yeah, I remember how epic it was right after the burn, the tubs. I guess, I don't have too many real technical questions, reading it over. Obviously it was well written. I can say that I think everyone in our community in Sonoma and Marin are really excited that you and also Len are doing this work, because it brings a lot to our communities. And to that end, I think obviously this is a project of where you're trying to, build confidence, but we all know that when we're doing this kind of research, that we often really become acutely aware of gaps. And I think that in some degree is going to be a huge value to our community as an outcome of your project. Do you have like 1 to 3, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but 1 to 3 kind of gaps that you see that folks in our area can kind of continue, yourself included, but as practitioner kind of based, in the field, kind of looking into stuff, can kind of improve upon, whether that's a vegetation type we don't have much information out about, or a kind of burning, or a burn window that we need to learn more about. Did anything pop out at you in this whole process?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that popped out to me. One thing, so originally I actually wanted this plan to include chaparral, and the document started getting really long, and I was crunched for time, and I think it was a robust enough master project with just focusing on oak woodland and grasslands. I think chaparral is I've had a lot of conversations about burning chaparral, and I think it's one thing that I think our community can learn more about from an ecological and cultural kind of perspective, and not just seeing it as a fuel loading issue. And so I think there's more experimenting, and I don't think we've been doing too much chaparral burning. I know there's been a few here and there. So it's one thing I think wanting to expand on. In terms of like a burn window, one thing that this program has got me really excited about is just conversations with Dawn about like burning for annual grass cotyledons. So like trying to get the timing of like late fall, early spring, when you get like a little flush of like green annual grass cotyledons while your thatch material is still dry and can kind of carry through. So that's been one thing I've been playing around with Pepperwood on a really small scale. And I think I've seen some really good success. It's a very narrow window, and you don't get it every year, but it's one thing I've been really interested in trying to pursue, because the seasonality, and like you kind of almost at a permit season. So CAL FIRE's happy to give permits. I think you can do it with really low resource input. And I think you get really great ecological success. I think playing with that timing, I'm still learning, but it's one window that I've been excited about through this process. And a large part of that has been kind of informed by Dawn, and then just going out and trying. And then I think one big piece that I wasn't really expecting through this process is just like learning to read the landscape for fire. And from like talking to folks just kind of about the traditional ecological knowledge, and when I interviewed Clint, he kind of laughed at the idea of like fire return intervals having set times. And from my background understanding fire, that's really how I was thinking about it, is this Western perspective of like, well, oak woodlands burn between every 7 and 15 years. But just trying to shift that lens, and like I think that gives a good framework and like this broad paintbrush of like, okay, this is like rough timing that kind of makes sense, but like not setting your clock for those times, but actually going out on the land and going, does this seem right? What are the things I need to be paying attention to? And I commonly will say like the ecology is more complex than our human neurons can kind of understand. So I think it's a constant learning process. And so that's been one thing that's been, I think, a pretty big shift in my understanding of fire on the landscape, has really been like not setting your clock for certain time periods, but really just spending time on the land. And just kind of learning to read the landscape for fire. And I think a big part of that is also going post-fire and watching the recovery of the land, and spending time with the land. And I know that's really hard in our Western day-to-day life, because we have so many things going on. And oftentimes it's like we're so behind on our fire clock that we need to put fire on the ground so rapidly. But I hope that we can really start to take more time to kind of reflect on the burns that we did do and spend time on the post-burn kind of environment.
Yeah, that's great. Do you, again, not to put you on the spot here if you're prepared for this, but have you had any thoughts about how, outside of our kind of typical very expensive monitoring type frameworks, have you had thoughts about how we might capture some of those observations to share with each other?
Yeah,
it's a big problem. You don't have to have an answer now.
Yeah, I mean, photo
points
points are good. Presentations are good. I've saw somebody do an ARC story map, and I think those are kind of cool. So I think just like I'm not as much of like an artist creative, but I do think creating space for those people. And I think the prescribed fire community, intentional fire community in California has really done a good job of like introducing these cool ways of storytelling. So yeah, I think it's good. And I think being creative and coming up with multiple ways of telling these stories. One thing I just recently did was had a group of like 20 people come back, and we just looked at 3 burns I did this last year and just said, hey, it's springtime. Let's go check out these burns. Let's see if the results made. So I think creating space to just invite people out to the land to observe fires, but also post-fire, I think is important.
Great, Devyn. Thanks. That's all I really have as far as kind of broad questions. Don, I guess I can pass it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And I love those responses. That was really fantastic. There's a couple of things that I'm thinking about right now. One, Devyn, if we think about the state's Wildfire Forest Resilience Action Plan, and then the state's strategic plan for expanding the use of beneficial fire, both of those documents talk about the need to restore fire into fire footprints. You are dealing with that right now, obviously, with the entirety of Pepperwood burning since 2017. I'm kind of curious, like how in your planning you're using the opportunities of restoring fire to restore both structure and diversity of species within the plan. That's the first question.
Yeah, that's a big one. I think for me, it's really all I know, because my intentional fire journey really started after the wildfires. So I think it adds a little bit of a time to observe. So I was fortunate to kind of really watch the Tubbs fire recovery process, and just kind of see, and that was really kind of started my journey. Like, how is the native plants, how are the animals responding to this fire? And I was just really inspired by like, oh my God, they all know what to do. And so I think that kind of took away some of my fear of like, oh, am I going to damage things with fire? So it kind of, I think it eased some of those like maybe concerns I had. And I really think a lot of the areas burned different severities. So some areas burnt in the wildfires, but I think some of areas burnt with low to moderate fire, and it actually really set up the ground for like, we're on track now to bring back fire in a really intentional way that's like kind of set. I also, have leaned really heavily on our Native Advisory Council, especially Clint McKay, to kind of just go out and walk on the land and try and absorb as much of his perspective to like, how should fire come back? Is fire ready to come back in these areas? And I think some areas like letting it rest for durations of time as you're watching kind of some of those higher severity areas. And then also doing mechanical fuels reduction as well. So going in with chainsaws and actually going, hey, like, I don't know if prescribed fire is the right choice right now, given this area just had a ton of, large oaks burn at high intensity, and now they're really struggling. And so we've been doing some areas of just getting fuels reduction in through pile burning and finding what areas kind of need more of that more intensive fuels management kind of piece because those areas had been so overgrown and then burnt at really high intensity. And then what areas are really ready for bringing back low intensity, or as Clint says, low and slow fire. And really that's the way that the WAPO people, like some of their main intentions were with fire. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and really just taking each project area, kind of not thinking about it as the whole preserve, but like kind of trying to think about specific project areas and spending time and really thinking about it, instead of sitting at a computer and drawing maps and be like, oh, this here's a good burn unit, but really identifying those areas on the ground.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. And then the last question I'll ask, so we can turn it over to the audience here, is, thinking about you're going to be building this out further for other areas of the properties. And looking at the maps, I see these like fingers, particularly off the western, like northwestern and southwestern edge, that are kind of narrow. And obviously, like, there's challenges with like land tenure shifts in the state. That's always going to be an issue. But then knowing that, we've got, I think, what is it, Assembly Bill 1101, which is focused on like trying to actuate around the idea of potential operation delineations and how beneficial fire might fit into that. How might future iterations of your work look to expand fire beyond the boundaries of just Pepperwood in terms of like cross-boundary burning?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And like, just in terms of Pepperwood's neighbors, we've been in conversations, and I think our community has burnt in wildfires. So some of the community is very nervous around prescribed fire. And we've gotten some angry emails and angry phone calls as we've sent smoke up in the air, just really based out of fear. And so I think one thing we're starting with is building trust and building confidence in our ability to bring in prescribed fire. And then, as you said, that north end of the property and the ridge lines, I mean, these property lines are like little squares somebody drew on a parcel map, I don't know when. And so we have been in conversations with our neighbors, but really just looking at geographic burn units and not property burn units, I think is really important for the expansion. We're really fortunate to have some awesome CAL FIRE leadership in our county, and they have they built the trust up too. So actually, I've worked a little bit with some of our battalion chiefs to actually like have these conversations with neighbors, because they kind of have that badge of authority, and not just some random person wearing a flower shirt trying to burn on their property, but really kind of like pulling in the right partners to make those conversations easier. And we're fortunate both that work closely with our Native Advisory Council on these kind of fire projects, but also kind of with CAL FIRE. So having both kind of ecological perspective that Pepperwood has, CAL FIRE defensible space perspective, and then the traditional ecological knowledge perspective. And I think between those three perspectives, we've been really able to open up conversations with some of our neighbors and some of our other partners in our community. We're just at conversation stages. So I hope that they'll expand and grow. We're also really fortunate to have the Fire Forward team in Sonoma County as well, which is really just focused on like helping expand fire across. So we're really fortunate to have some awesome agency and nonprofit partners to really support the expansion beyond Pepperwood's borders. And I was out doing we have a vegetation management plan with CAL FIRE. And so CAL FIRE was going to do a burn on a property, and I was driving with our battalion chief, and he was like, oh man, someday I want to burn from that hill to that hill, and really looking across like 3 or 4 big properties. And so I think there's other people with that vision as well. And so that kind of gives me hope that it's not just me, but there's some really important partners out there that are thinking along those same lines.
Awesome. Thanks for that response. And I'm glad to hear that vision is already there. I want to turn it over to audience. I see that we've got Ty. Looks like Ty has a question, so I'll turn it over there, and then we'll ask around in the room here too.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Great presentation, Devyn. Super rad work. It's great to see a graduate project that is project based rather than research based. It's, still is going to have a lot of ripple effects with folks in the North Bay. It's really cool to see that you're doing fire planning across the whole, or most of Pepperwood Preserve. There's a lot of time spent doing individual unit planning, and I'm curious, for those of us who are looking to do more property-wide, like programmatic burn plans, if you have any, having gone through the process, if you have any like tips or tricks or things to look out for in setting out in that process.
Yeah, great question. It was a bit of a journey, and I will say I was really fortunate. Len, I had a lot of conversations with Len, who's also in this program, and kind of did something pretty similar to blanking on what property he did on right now, but he did it on a regional parks property, and so I got some guidance from him, and kind of just looking at what he did. Jared Childers in the Central Coast PPA also did one for Big Preserve down there. So he kind of had it in a different format. Len had it in a different format. And I kind of what made the most sense to me. I also talked to my battalion chief, and I would say that's pretty important, because if the battalion chief's like, no, I won't accept that, there's not really a point of making it, because really this burn plan is to kind of help, those hurdles of making individual burn units. But if you need to make the individual burn units for your battalion chief, you kind of have to do them anyways. So that was one thing that also kind of helped guide me, and it was like, hey, what do you want to see? How big can I do this? And I have had a long relationship with my battalion chief. So that was something that also I think was helpful, that I didn't really mention much, but like really be like, does this make sense? Can I do this? Was also helpful. And that's kind of why I kept it in that framework of the California Standardized Burn Plan, so that the reviewers at the state level and at the local CAL FIRE level will kind of like, it'll make sense to them. It won't be too much of a curveball. I also broke them into those sections so that things could be taken out and replaced in if for some reason a different battalion chief comes in, because as we know, state government has turnover and new people come in. And so leaving it adaptable, I guess, is really important, so that you can sub stuff out if you need to.
That's great. Thanks.
All right, looking around the room here and also our online, are there any other questions that we have for Devyn? Everybody looks like deer in the headlights in here right now. So I think you did a good job of shock and awe. Yeah, that was a really fantastic presentation. I'm super excited to see this, and like Brian, looking forward to getting back out on Pepperwood with you guys and burning and supporting that work. I think I see a couple of thumbs up in the room too. So I think there's some folks from Beacer that would like to come over, but always good to do that. Generally speaking, when we have these kinds of presentations, we as committee have some conversations on the side. Being that we're virtual, we won't have that. But I'll just say that I think, based off of the feedback that I've seen from Brian and myself, I don't think there's anything additional that we'll ask you to tweak with your work. I think we're good to go. Brian, unless I see a thumbs up from Brian. So 2 thumbs up. I think we're ready to go. So congratulations on that. And we'll celebrate by burning at some point. But yeah, congratulations. And yeah, we'll go from there. As a reminder, I'll just say, I'll give you a moment here, Devyn, to just kind of add some final thoughts. But I just want to remind folks that on Thursday, at 1 o'clock, Len will be presenting on his work, similar topic. And so same room for folks here if you're interested and available to come. Devyn, I'll turn it over to you to wrap it up.
Yeah, I just really want to thank you, Dawn and Brian, my committee, for the guidance. It's been a journey, and I definitely have learned and absorbed a lot. And I think there's a lot more to learn, but I feel like I gained a lot from this program, and it was unfortunate that I was kind of remote. Being whenever the opportunities to be in Chico and get up to the BSER was awesome. But a really big shout out to the BSER staff and leadership there. We've been able to partner with up at Pepperwood and just have learned so much from some folks there too. So it's a really cool program. BSER is awesome, and everyone who works up there. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and work with you, and especially you, Dawn, and thanks for the guidance, Brian. It's been very helpful. So a good learning journey, and then also everyone in the graduate offices at Chico for all these kind of last minute getting the paper to fit all the formats and look like it's supposed to look. And so, yeah, everyone at the Chico grad office and Gary at the Wildland program office have just been really supportive and helpful. And I really couldn't have done it without everyone.
Excellent.
Nice work, Devyn.
All right. One more round of applause. Excellent. We'll see some of you on Thursday. And I'll turn it back to Gary to close out this thing. But yeah, we'll see you around, Devyn and Brian. Take care.
Thank you.
Go celebrate, Devyn. Log out. Have a good day, everybody.
Yeah.